Vision Realms released a producer's letter that, for the first time, actually lays out their goals for what day one of Pantheon's alpha will look like. And that's a pretty big deal if you ask me. That's a lot more communication than they've ever given about alpha. So not only are they actually outlining the steps to get there, but they're also confident enough in that to start sharing it with the public. It's obviously not a specific date for when alpha will start, but it's more of like a to-do list of what's left until they actually get there. And so I figured, in light of this, which they've never really done, I would do something that I've never really done and just kind of go through this together with all of you from beginning to end, because like I said, there's a lot to break down, and I'll just kind of give my thoughts about it along the way. So it starts off by kind of giving their philosophy as to what alpha actually means. So it says, a more traditional alpha would serve function over form, and some of the unessential bells and whistles would be excluded, but Pantheon alpha would be different. Thousands of people will experience Pantheon for the first time in alpha. We're in an era where certain expectations are set when it comes to a first hands-on look at a game. For better or for worse, we do need to consider form as well. If resources are going into form and function, then we need to be judicious about which features are included at the start of alpha, which are included later in alpha, and which, if any, are left for beta. So they're talking about all these kind of like early access models and such over the years that have kind of changed the way that players overall really view what they expect alpha to be for any given game. And this is something that I have talked about before on my channel, that I don't necessarily like it, but I do agree that that is just the way things are right now. It's not really something that you can avoid. Those first impressions really do matter so much. Like, this is, if you compare it back to, like, let's say EverQuest in like 1997, 98, when EverQuest was in alpha and beta, alpha meant a very different thing back then. That's why they're talking about very traditional alpha would serve function over form. Like, EverQuest in alpha was very clunky. It did not look good, but people understood that they were there to, test the actual gears of it, the mechanics of it. But, obviously things change. Fast forward 20 years, alpha just serves a very different purpose, and also information spreads across the internet so much easier, and those first impressions that people give once they start sharing it, whether it be through streams or just word of mouth, like, word gets around so much faster, and so you need to be a lot more careful as to what people actually see when they get their hands on the game for the first time. They're going to have a lot less tolerance. Again, I'm speaking in general terms, a lot less tolerance for lack of polish. Again, I don't like that, but that's how it is. And so the devs have kind of had to accept that that's just how it is. And even though it's a little bit more difficult to go about it that way, you really only get one chance at a first impression, right? Like, it's like a tube of toothpaste. Once it gets out, you can't get it back in. That word of mouth, if it just spreads like wildfire, if like we're talking about, if the graphics or the animations are just not there, or if there's just hardly anything to actually test, it just really leaves a sour taste in people's mouth, Like, obviously there are some rare exceptions of games that have been kind of able to overcome a bad first impression, but going down that route is it's just so difficult. It's so unlikely to actually be able to overcome a bad first impression. So no dev would ever really want to willingly go down that road. So I think this is part of the reason why Pantheon's alpha hasn't happened sooner. Don't get me wrong, it's not the whole reason, but it's definitely part of the reason why it's taken longer than expected, because I think originally they were planning on having a very literal alpha, where, you know, the art and graphics were just very, very primitive, and they wanted to focus on the more core mechanics. But I think they eventually realized that was just not really the way to go. So that's just where it's at right now. So they go on to say, let me be also clear that the goal is not for alpha to be representative of launch ready, but alpha needs to be much more polished than a traditional alpha would otherwise require. Do not consider it early access. Unlike early access titles, only a small portion of the game's content will be available for Alpha 1, and several of its systems will only be available as a first iteration. That is where the 1 in Alpha 1 comes in. Alpha will have several phases like pre-alpha. The sessions will be longer than the 3 to 5 hour sessions that have been established as the established norm for pre-alpha. In terms of planning, we have now scoped what we feel is essential for day 1 of alpha. These day 1 essentials are all part of Alpha 1. The list of essentials is a big one. We know with the current team size that this would take some time to complete. So a big part of this year is exploring options on how to finish Alpha 1 in a reasonable time frame. Our current options are to add more resources or to descope some of the features for Alpha 1. A little bit of both will be done before the year is over. With that in mind, let's take a look at some of the features that are targeted for Alpha 1. This is not a complete list. All right, so let's just go through them one at a time. And obviously, with the evaluation build that they have come up with that is really laser focused on acquiring, you know, more investors and funding and resources, as they put it. You know, we can always hope that will be effective and bring in the resources that they need to really speed this along, but you know, can't necessarily bank on that. So if descoping some of these features for Alpha 1 is the other option, let's kind of go through here and prioritize, from my perspective anyway, what is really necessary for Alpha 1 and what's not. So classes, number 1, we want to add the remaining classes. The groundwork is done for most classes and they already start receiving their ability set, but there are a couple unique functionality class abilities that require extra consideration. I'm looking at you, Ranger and Summoner. It is still possible that Alpha 1 will not launch with all classes, but we'll have at least 9 of the 12. So I'll start off by saying that if they do in fact only have 9 of the 12 classes at the beginning of alpha, and you are one of the people who have been waiting for so long to play, let's say a summoner, let's say the summoner is your favorite class and you've been waiting so long to play the summoner, and you come in on Alpha 1 and you can't actually play the summoner, that feels bad. Like, that sucks. I know from previous newsletters that they have talked about the difficulty that they have had, particularly with the summoner, because of the way that the pets work, which actually is number 2. This goes hand in hand with classes. Pets need to come back into the game in a scalable, sustainable way. So yeah, so these are kind of interconnected. With the summoner in particular, you know, their pets, they have their own pathing, they have their own AI and their abilities, they have their own gear. Like, it's almost like playing 2 characters at once. And I remember they have said that actually implementing all the plans that they have for the summoner have proven to be a little bit easier said than done. So yeah, that's a tricky one. Obviously, you know, people are going to want to play their classes. Although I think there's something to be said for, like, you know, it's just alpha. You're going to want to at least play some of it to see what it actually feels like firsthand. I'm of the opinion that when I go into alpha, I'm not going to want to just constantly play the class that I'm going to play on release, because I don't want to necessarily feel burned out with that class before the game even launches. So I think there is a lot of value in playing multiple classes. And, you know, I guess it's not that unreasonable to, you know, say to people like the, you know, more classes are going to be added throughout alpha and beta and stuff like that. But yeah, that would feel bad. That would feel bad to not be able to play your class right off the bat. Let's skip to number 3, NPC combat awareness, short description, better AI. This is a pretty big one because a lot of people understandably put stock into combat. They're really going to be judging combat hard in alpha, as they should. And so if combat doesn't feel really good for the most part, people are gonna slam it, I would expect. You know, whatever it is about Pantheon's combat that makes it unique and fun, probably needs to be front loaded in alpha and put that right up front, because that is one of those things that's kind of harder to explain, like, oh, it's gonna get better, you know. And of course, like, there's obviously like numbers tweaking and polish and stuff that happens over the entire lifespan of an MMO, but better AI, specifically, we're talking about NPC combat awareness. That's a big deal. If the NPCs are actually behaving dynamically in a way that's interesting and that's creating challenging fights, then that's not like a minor detail. That's a fundamental thing that needs to be right up front. Number 4, URP and networking. Big asterisk on this one. Let's come back to it after the list. All right, we'll come back to it. Number 5, basic guild functionality. This one kind of surprised me, to be honest. This is the first one that I'm not sure if this is really necessary for day 1 of alpha, for a few reasons. One of them being that people just understand what guilds are. Like, it feels like it would be pretty reasonable to just tell people guilds are coming in later. Maybe it's just later in alpha, but you know, if you say that, people are gonna be like, okay, because I even though guilds in Pantheon are gonna be an important part of it because it's a community-oriented, very social game. So yes, guilds are a big deal, but on day 1 of alpha, you know, it's not even beta. Like, there's still gonna be you know, probably periodic server wipes, and there's gonna be testing forums and stuff for people to keep in touch with. So I just don't, unless they have something really revolutionary planned for the guild interface, I don't know. I feel like this is something that's just not really that necessary. Maybe even if you just have like a friends list that you can keep track of the people that you actually want to play with online. I feel like that would be sufficient, because again, like, the servers, they said the server sessions are going to be longer, but the servers aren't going to be up 24 hours a day. So I think I don't know. I think guilds can be pushed off a little bit. Number 6, perception system fleshed out. We've seen the basics. Time to add in the skill framework, tome of keeping, and passive progression. This, on the other hand, is a big one because perception system is one of the game's core differentiators. So unlike guilds, somebody who's experiencing Pantheon for the first time isn't going to know what the perception system actually means. You know, you can tell people guilds are coming later. They're like, all right, got it. If you tell them the perception system is going to be coming later, or, you know, there's big parts of it that are going to be coming later, they're not going to know what that means. So again, anything that really makes the game unique and stand out from the competitors, that needs to be front loaded. That way, people experiencing it for the first time, they actually get like, oh, this is what makes Pantheon unique, and this is why I should care about it and pay attention to it. So number 7, harvesting and crafting needs to be fleshed out. Even though people kind of get what harvesting and crafting means, it sounds like Pantheon specifically is aiming to make harvesting and crafting much more of a important aspect of the gameplay than it would be in most other MMOs. So again, kind of one of those things, like if you really want, if that's really going to be a core part of the game, like perception system is, people need to, it needs to just be there so that people can actually just get it just by looking at it, rather than like, don't underestimate how unlikely it is for people to really be able to wrap their head around what's going to be coming later. Number 8, banks to keep all your loot. So this is something that like I didn't really think about it at first, but yeah, that is necessary. Because again, even though there's probably going to be some server wipes, like there's also going to be a lot of adventuring going on and a lot of gear being acquired, and yeah, banks, you gotta have them. Number 9, further refine acclimation. More climates and atmospheres need to be added as well as functionality for them. So yeah, acclimation, like the climate system, the perception system, the climbing system. These are all things that need to be done. Actually, yeah, number 10, more work needs to be done on climbing. It needs skill-based functionality so you can improve in climbing. Some other considerations are being tweaked along with it. Again, all same category. Those core differentiators need to be in really good shape on day 1 of alpha if you want people to actually have a good idea as to what Pantheon actually is. Number 11, more dispositions need to be added. We've seen pyrophobic, many more are coming. So this I would actually kind of wrap in with what was it? Number 3, NPC combat awareness, better AI. Dispositions are another way of making combat more intriguing, more interesting, more fun, more dynamic. So if that's a big part of what will make Pantheon's combat stand out from other games. So yeah, that's kind of a non-negotiable. Need to have people need to understand. I would even probably wrap that into the differentiators to a degree, as far as if you were to tell people like, oh, the dispositions are going to be added later, somebody who hasn't been following Pantheon is going to be like, what does that mean? So put it up front. Number 12, we'd like to add the capability to load ability sets so you don't have to spend a ton of time manually selecting spells and abilities you have already saved to a loadout. This one's kind of interesting to me. Again, also kind of surprised me. My gut is telling me that this is not necessary. This is, by definition, like just a quality of life thing, which I'm not saying alpha can't have any quality of life, because it should be fun, and there shouldn't be that many hang-ups along the way. But this in particular, like, is anybody really gonna rage quit if they don't have the ability to load spell sets? I kind of doubt it. It depends on how much time is this actually going to take to implement. If it's like a day or two of a programmer's time, then fine, throw it in. But if this is going to be if that's a major undertaking, then it feels like one of those things, again, just like Alpha 2. Like, that's in my mind, again, you feel free to disagree, but like I feel like this is something to be pushed off just a little bit. Doesn't need to be day 1 of alpha, but just a little bit later. 13, the return of swimming. Sure. Number 14, we need an LFG tool for people to find or fill groups. This is an interesting one too, and it feels certainly much more necessary than guild functionality, because yeah, people need to be able to find groups, and one of actually the most common concerns that I see about alpha are that because there's such an emphasis on grouping and social gameplay and stuff like that, a lot of people are understandably concerned that, you know, if they don't have a ton of time to play, it's going to be hard to find groups, and you're just gonna, you know, you might feel like you're not really able to accomplish that much. Like, that's a legitimate concern. So if, again, these people that are experiencing alpha for the first time, if there's anything that even in the slightest might confirm their fears that, oh, I'm just not gonna have enough time to play Pantheon, that would be really bad if that ended up being the case. So yeah, an LFG tool definitely feels important. And now I would also want to clarify, I kind of wish they had clarified this in the newsletter, but Ben Dean ended up clarifying it later elsewhere, that or really confirming the plans that they have had for a long time when it comes to an LFG tool. This is not like something that just auto fills groups, that it just automatically sticks you together with random people and then teleports you to a dungeon. It's nothing like that. It literally is just a tool that makes it easier for you to find like-minded players that have the same goals as you. And so you can just to make it a little bit easier to find people that you'll want to group with, but it's not super hand-holdy or anything like that. So that yeah, that'll be great to see. Number 15, more factions are being worked on and implemented as we speak. Cool. Although I would caution them to not get too carried away with things like this, because like if there are a handful of factions that are missing from day one of alpha or whatever, like, are people really gonna notice that? No. Like, it's one of those minor things that just really isn't gonna have that much of an impact on the experience. So if it's really gonna delay day one of alpha that much, it's probably better to just put it off till a little bit later. Number 16, there needs to be some sort of onboarding for new players. We don't want to hold anyone's hand, but we do need a way to show players how to play, particularly with systems like crafting. Also a kind of a tricky one. And I could probably do a whole nother video on onboarding, because I think this is actually, specifically on launch day, this is going to be one of probably the biggest obstacles that Pantheon has to overcome, is in an MMO where all the fun happens over, most of the fun anyway, the deep, meaningful fun happens over long periods of time. You know, it's a living world where you're creating bonds and friendships with people and overcoming, you know, and working really hard over long periods of time to overcome these difficult, challenging obstacles. Like, those really core, deep things can't be experienced within your first couple hours of gameplay. And it's really hard, again, for people who don't have any context of what Pantheon is. You simply cannot just trust that they're going to assume that they're going to experience that deep, meaningful gameplay a long time from now. Do you know what I mean? Like, I don't like it, but it's true. It's one of those things where the first impressions do matter, and people's attention spans are just generally not going to be long enough for a game like Pantheon to really shine, unless they are really, really, really good at kind of giving you a taste of that up front and showing you that, you know, that's the type of experience that you will get over time. But how do you do that within the first couple of hours? It's a complicated problem. But anyway, we're talking about alpha here. And yeah, I guess it does make sense that there should be some basic tutorial, but there kind of already is. Like when I was playing in Fortress de Vair, there were pop-ups that appeared to, show you the controls for things like climbing. Here, hold down shift as you approach a ledge to climb. Things like that make sense. And again, like if it's not going to take that much time to implement, then yeah, that should be included in alpha. But yeah, as they move on toward launch, I'll save my thoughts, because that's going to be a really complex problem to tackle as they get near to launch. To how can you convince people to stick around longer to really get to the meat of what Pantheon actually is, which is, the satisfaction that comes with sticking with something, working on a long-term goal with your friends, and the satisfaction that comes with that. How do you do that without, hand-holding and really making it trivial and dumbing down that experience? Super complicated problem that we will get to later. Number 17, more player and NPC models needed. Makes sense. More animations needed. Also makes sense, and also really important, because animations, again, are one of those things that people really latch onto, and they put a lot of stock into animations. I don't necessarily agree with it, but again, it's just the way things are. Where if the animations are not synced up with your actions and they're not really responsive and they don't feel fluid, it does feel bad, and people judge that hardcore. So as not even just more animations, but I would even advocate for more polished animations in alpha, just so that you don't turn away, too many people that really think that that's important. To some degree, yes, you can explain that, animations are going to be worked on throughout alpha and beta, as they should. But I mean, you can see even in pre-alpha now, you see on the comments on YouTube videos, like people slam animations because it's super obvious. It's one of the first things that your eyes notice when you're watching gameplay. And I don't know if maybe it's different when you're playing it, when you're experiencing it firsthand. I think that's part of it, because when I was playing Pantheon, I wasn't necessarily paying as much attention to the animations as I would if I was just watching it. But yeah, it's still something you need to take into consideration. Okay, number 19, more audio, better audio. This one kind of surprised me too for some reason. Audio is definitely kind of something that is often underestimated in its importance. And it really does have like a huge impact on just how much fun you're having playing the game and how immersive the experience is. Like, and it's sort of the thing that you don't necessarily notice until it's not there, and there's no background music or the music is bad. So it's definitely important, but like, I guess it depends on how much more and how much better audio they're talking about when it comes to Alpha 1, because I don't know, to me personally, it feels like something that could be fleshed out later. That's a hard one. I'll have to think about that one more. Number 20. We are shooting for complete non-gray boxed zones for Alpha 1 to represent a level 1 to 30 experience. The full zone list will be available close to Alpha 1 launch. Alpha 1 will not be all of King's Reach as we had previously set as an early goal. More zones will be added later in Alpha phases, some of which you have already seen in early forms. Others will be all new. All right. complete non-gray box zones is excellent. This kind of ties back to what I was saying earlier with the first impressions. Again, this is my personal opinion, feel free to disagree. I just don't think you can count on people really being that understanding of gray boxing if it is heavily used. Maybe small assets here and there, whatever, not a big deal. But for the majority, if it starts looking too much like Minecraft, again, because people know, like, it's not a secret that Pantheon has been in the public eye for a long time. And so, from their perspective coming in, they're like, well, this game has been in development for all these years and it's still got these like blocky assets. Like, again, if you really, really put yourself in those shoes, it's not a good look. Like, to some degree, you kind of have to put your best foot forward there. So I personally am an advocate for as little gray boxing as possible. And it's like the quality over quantity thing. You want to show people, like, this is a representation of what Pantheon, the graphic fidelity that Pantheon will have at launch, even if that means having less zones, as long as those zones are content dense and keep people occupied. Like, they're representing a level 1 to 30 experience rather than 1 to 50. So the max level would be 50, but 1 to 30 will not be all of King's Reach, as we had previously set as an early goal. More zones will be added in later alpha phases. So yeah, so again, we're looking at day 1. Depending on how quickly it takes to level up to 30, if they can add some more of those other zones, again, which there are several zones that, have already had a lot of work done and will probably be, on deck and will be relatively easy to kind of bring in like alpha 2 or something like that. That shouldn't be a problem. If it actually takes a decent amount of time to level up, you don't need a level 40 to 50 zone on day 1 of alpha, because nobody's going to be that high level. So that is the sort of thing where you can, as long as those zones are primed and ready to be added in later, I don't really foresee a big problem with that. Anyway, some items may be missing from this list for a full alpha experience. Please keep in mind that this is only a list for alpha 1. Day 1 of alpha is very different from the last day of alpha before heading into beta, which will have the remaining features and content we've outlined in the past, which is all of King's Reach, basically what I was just saying. All right, now let's go back to that big asterisk of the URP networking. Converting the entire project to a universal render pipeline allows for better performance, more advanced shaders, and simplicity in creating shaders. The network component is in preparation to support the thousands of players we have coming in. The engine is complete and smashingly performant, but it needs to be integrated. These are big tasks. They are going to take our lead programmer's attention several months. So right now, Kyle and Rob, who's another one of their programmers, are getting some tooling in place so that the rest of the team can keep working when he goes heads down into the universal render pipeline and networking stuff. So this, obviously is one of those non-negotiables, because they have said that they have already, there's over 8,000 people that are signed up for alpha, and I'm pretty confident that when the time comes, when it gets closer and they actually announce an alpha date, I think there's going to be a lot more people jumping on board. A lot more than 8,000. So, that's a lot of players to accommodate in. If you want to talk about first impressions, if they're having serious server issues and just general performance issues, like, that's a real quick way to just scare people off, and that really ruins the fun of the entire experience. And so on the flip side, if you have a game that looks very beautiful and runs very smoothly, for a lot of people, even if they don't have a top end machine and they're not having any sort of screen tearing or hitching or anything like that, and the server is not lagging and it's like really smooth, that alone goes a long way toward people really feeling like, wow, like this actually feels a lot better than a lot of other games that are out there in alpha and even launch. So that, I mean, it's a huge deal. It's a huge undertaking, but I think the payoff of that will be well worth it. They've been touting this network library that Kyle Olson specifically has pioneered that supposedly is just like revolutionary and is capable of things that hasn't really been seen before. So we'll see about that when the time comes. That definitely is going to be something to keep an eye on. So it goes on to say this means that much of the progress will be in the code and not stuff we can show on screen. The other work will still be done in the background, but until the URP and networking are done, it will be difficult to show. This primarily affects PA testers and streams. However, there is a ton of content already prepared that we can show and test during that time. Just don't expect big zone reveals or anything like that until the URP and network updates are done. I'm glad they clarified, though, that the programmers are continuing to set up tools. They've said it in the past, but they're setting up some more tools to allow the rest of the team, like specifically the designers, to keep adding content to the game. Like that's a huge bottleneck that they have struggled with in the past, that really slows things down. Like, you know, the designers come up with all this stuff, but if the pipeline, if the bottleneck isn't the programmers, like the designers prepare all the content, but it actually requires a programmer to actually go into the game itself. That can potentially be a huge issue and a point of failure. So the fact that the programmers, like this is something that Kyle has seemed to do really well with, is giving the designers and other people on the team tools to actually add things, you know, like class abilities can actually go from the designer's plans into the game without the programmers being involved at all. That's going to be super important to allow that kind of concurrent and simultaneous work to be done, because again, like they said, programmers are going to be deep in the networking stuff for a while, which is great, but that doesn't mean that everything else isn't going to be done. So they say we'll keep you updated from month to month with the status of the above items and more. Once we're certain of a date, we will publish it. We won't publish it until we are 100% certain of that date. So please don't expect to see a solid date soon, but do expect to see the progress as we move forward. Yeah, that's good, because they have in the past, when they have kind of made public their rough goals for like when they want to reach certain milestones, it hasn't paid off. It has not been, it's only caused more harm than good. So it'll be nice to once we know a date, we know for 100% certain that date we can actually count on that. So some stuff to look forward to. There's newsletter goes on, to talk about a new designer that joined the team and the next test sessions. But I actually did an episode of the Baz Flash recently that covers all that super fast. So I won't go over that again. This is mainly is talking about, I mainly wanted to break down their to-do list here, kind of give my thoughts, also hear your thoughts as well. Again, that might be helpful to the developers as far as when it comes to deciding what maybe isn't actually that essential for day one of alpha. So if you have thoughts about this, any of these things on this list, if you think something is maybe could be pushed off till later in alpha, leave a comment, let them know that way they can get that feedback, and I'd be curious as well as to where people stand on this, because this is just my perspective. But anyway, I hope you got something out of this. I had a lot of fun doing just a more kind of laid back video than I normally do, but of course I will be keeping you guys up to date as the game moves closer toward alpha. I'll keep you up to date with as soon as I know something, I will tell you. So if you haven't already, hit the subscribe button so that you don't miss any of those updates, and I will see you in the next video.